everybody, and welcome to Skyrim. I'm here in the Argonian assemblage, a tenement house just outside the walls of frigid Windhelm. I've traveled here as part of my work with the companions to deal with a local bandit group that had been preying on non-Nords. They were doing this because Jarl Ulfric Stormcloak and the city guard do very little to protect races other than Nords and beast races, so-called beast races, like the Argonians, are utterly devoid of protection. Indeed, Argonians like myself aren't even allowed to live within the city, which is why this assemblage exists. But that's why the companions sent me and my wife, Aola, who is also a companion of great renown, to Windhelm to protect the locals from this bandit group. I spent the night in the assemblage. As I always do when I visit Windhelm, I'm somewhat wary of provoking the local Nords by trying to sleep in the city's inn within the walls. And as I'm friendly with the Argonian dock workers, they're always happy to provide a bed for me. Although they were somewhat uncomfortable with the idea of allowing Aola to spend the night as well, given that she is a Nord, but as she helped me destroy the bandits that had been troubling the Argonians, they gave her the benefit of the doubt. And I suppose her being my wife also probably bought some goodwill. So, even though I can't stay in the city, I wanted to poke my head inside just to take a look at how the Nords treat another group of foreigners, the Dark Elves. This narrow alley here leads to the slum known as the Grey Quarter. The Grey Quarter, named for the grey skin of the Dunmer who live here. And I want to show you something, something interesting. I am holding a sword called True Flame here, and Aola there is holding a sword called Hope's Fire. True Flame was once the sword of Nerevar, a legendary Dunmer warrior and leader from Morrowind. And Hope's Fire was the sword of Almalexia, a god of the Dunmer tribunal. The swords were gifts from King Dumac of the Dwemer to celebrate the marriage of Nerevar and Almalexia. And long ago, the reforged both of these weapons. Now, as it happened, through a great stroke of Daedric irony, forged by Asura, the Nerevarine was an Argonian, and that Argonian happens to be my ancestor. As such, Hope's Fire and True Flame have been passed down in my family in the intervening generations. And it is tradition that the eldest child that receives the swords gifts Hope's Fire to their spouse. And in this way it is passed on from generation to generation of my family. So of course, when I married Aela, I gifted her Hope's Fire as part of this family tradition. I wanted to touch on that fact because normally when we have embarked on these quests together to seek out a valuable book, I usually use my Daedric artifact gold brand. But when I travel with Aeona, I often use True Flame alongside Aeona wielding Hope's Fire. So today I have a different sword by my side. And speaking of our previous journeys together, I have a similar goal today: to acquire a very valuable set of books. My plan today is to travel to Riften. I'm on good terms with the Thieves Guild there, and their fence, Tonilia, has let her network of thieves know that she will pay top dollar for rare books, which she then always tries to pass on to me. And I'm happy to pay her high prices. So, last night in Windhelm, I received word that she has acquired a complete set of the Song of Pelinal, and not merely a reprinting, but one of the first copies produced by the scholars who collated the various disparate sources into the song's modern form, pulling from the Riemann manuscript, the Canulus manuscript, and the so-called deathbed fragment. Pardon me. Essentially, this is what you might call a first edition of the modern canonized song, if you will. I have certainly been looking to get my hands on something like this for a long time, so I am more than happy to pay Tonilia's exorbitant fees. Here we are in Kynes Grove. They had some excitement recently when the dragons returned to Tamriel. A dragon was resurrected in their very own town. The local inn is called the Braidwood Inn, little obsessive book quest. So I will let her get back to business. Probably have to do some more work for the companions. And meanwhile, I am going to travel south into the rift and go meet my contact in the Thieves Guild. And as we go, we will appreciate the harsh landscape of Skyrim, which is, even in its harshness, absolutely beautiful. And we will be passing by a very remarkable geographic feature in Skyrim, a very unique area, a lowland plain of sulphurous hot springs, bubbling pools of stinking sulphurous water, which is, oh, hello little fox. I think I frightened him. This sulphurous area is quite unique, very interesting in the otherwise frigid, snowy landscape of Skyrim. The last place you would expect to stumble into a series of hot springs.
Alright, hand over your valuables.
Oh,
Like a fish.
looks like we're being accosted. Well, I'm certainly not giving him my money. Let's see if he will see sense. Alright, well, I hate to do this to a fellow Argonian, but it's sad that so many turn to banditry in times like these, although understandable, with a civil war raging and dragons having returned. The allure of banditry to make a living grows stronger. Anyway, he did get a good slice in on me, so I think I'm going to head off the road and rest for a short while my hissed skin knits my wounds shut. And while I'm resting, we can look off in the distance at this dragon circling its lair. I believe that sharp hill there is called Bone-Strewn Crest, and it now seems to be the home of a flying dragon, so we will hopefully avoid that winged reptile's attention. And interesting sight, while we were resting, it seems a giant has begun to shepherd his mammoth herd this direction, so we will give him a large buffer area. Certainly don't want to provoke him. can go safely on his way, and we'll go on ours. Giants are not exactly friendly folk, but as long as you let them be, they will tend to return the favor. They have no desire to get caught up in battles with us smaller folk. Alright, I'll just continue on my way. And I'll stop off here, take a look at the hot water. You can see in this green-yellow water, bubbling, churning air erupting from the otherwise placid, still surface. It is quite warm, and if not for the dragon flying within eyeshot, and the giant traipsing around, and who knows what other dangers lurking behind every tree, this might be a very relaxing spot to bathe. But given the dangers of the area, we're not going to stop and relax. Much as my Argonian nature would love to take a dip in the refreshing waters. Here we have a pillar here marked up by the giants. This camp here is a giant camp. They mark their territory with these painted boulders. And again, as long as you don't trespass beyond those, oh no. Hopefully this dragon is not interested in making us lunch. And rifting that way. We also have a note posted here. Attention, citizenry. The giant here has been given leave to keep his camp. Please do not attempt to make trade, disrupt the mammoths, gawk at, or otherwise disturb the giant. Resting here is not advised. Oops. Looks like I accidentally knocked the note off. Well, look, people should be smart enough not to interfere with a giant, even if there isn't a note. Another stone here marking the giant's territory. Fortunately, it looks like that second dragon had no interest in us. Oh, hello. Bears are so aggressive in this part of the world. Skyrim's bears will just, if they see you from 500 feet away, they will come for you. Yeah, that second dragon seems to have left. It was perhaps driven off by the sight of the one over bone-strewn crest. I don't know the nature of dragons very well, being that they have returned to Tamriel so recently, but I imagine they're somewhat territorial. With how much food a dragon needs to eat every day, the landscape of a local area probably can't looking at the mammoth, you would just never imagine that's what their eyes look like. Or, pardon me, my mind is wandering. You wouldn't imagine that's what their skulls look like. I had the word eye in my head because the big hole in the skull kind of looks like a giant eye. It looks like what you would imagine a cyclops looking like. So, oh no, a wolf. Skyrim's fauna is quite unpleasant. These Dwemer stairs lead to the old ruins of Imzoft, a ruin which I've heard contains a fantastical dwarven armillary. I have no doubt that many Dwemer scholars have lost their lives trying to find their way to the armillary, succumbing to the deadly dwarven automata, hostile underground fauna, or, worst of all, becoming victims of the wretched Falmer. At least the other options would probably kill you quickly, but the Falmer might do much, much worse. Oh, seems we have some Dremora, some Daedric humanoids. I'm not sure what these creatures from Oblivion are doing here, but it seems that they killed a few vigilants of Stendar here. The vigilants are an order that seek to destroy the influence of Oblivion in our world, along with other forces they view as unnatural and dangerous. I'm not sure what Imperial soldiers are doing here. East March Hold is still in the hands of the Stormcloaks, of course, and I believe around this area we are actually crossing into the Rift, which is also held by the Stormcloaks. Perhaps those Imperials were doing a mission in enemy territory. And of course, East March Hold, the capital, is Windhelm. I imagine those wolves were killed by those soldiers. And the capital of the Rift is Riften. That's an easy one to remember. The aggressive nature of Skyrim's wildlife it never ceases to surprise me. We have a nice view of the sulphurous area of East March down below. I think that's a shrine to Arcade there, those little stone finger looking things. But I could be wrong about that. I don't know the area tremendously well. So we will make our way up these switchbacks. And once we get up here, I think we will be solidly in the autumnal landscape of the Rift. But yes, the books that we are collecting today, the Song of Pelinal. If you are unfamiliar with Pelinal Whitestrake, he is a legendary demigod from the time of Saint Alessia, the slave queen. Whoa. He almost knocked me over. When Alessia prayed for reprieve from mankind's slavery under the Aelids, the gods sent down Pelinal along with his friend Morehouse, and they cast down the Aelid rulers, allowing the slave revolt of Alessia to be successful. Another cave bear on our path. I do hate to slaughter these creatures wholesale, but they really are quite aggressive. However, the slave revolt, certainly the humans fought and played an important role in the revolt against the Aelids. But in many ways, the entire war effort was held on the back of Pelinal Whitestrake. He was an invincible warrior. His armor and weaponry seemingly from a different time, a different world. And he could slaughter thousands upon thousands of elves without a single blow penetrating his armor. That little tower there is Shore's watchtower, and it is so named for the nearby town of Shore's Stone, which in turn is named for the ebony mine on which the town is built. Shore is, well, and speaking of Pelinal, some people say that Pelinal is Shore, that Pelinal is the Shezarine, and these are all different names for Lorcan, the trickster deity of Tamriel that led to the creation of the world and mortal kind. And so Lorcan, or Shezar, is called Shore by the Nords. And one story has it that when Lorcan was killed, and we have some samples of the ebony here. When Lorcan was killed, Ariel took his heart, stuck it on an arrow, and shot it through the air. Shore's blood rained down on Tamriel below, and wherever it fell, it became ebony. So, with the ebony mine here, the local Nords named the town that was built on the ebony mine Shore's Stone, because ebony is literally we will continue on through the town. We are drawing near at this point to Riften. Look at the beautiful colors. And as we were passing through East March, it was somewhat gray and dreary. But the weather has changed, and the rift is revealing its full array of dazzling colors to us. The golden leaves, the blue skies, the white clouds. The rift it has a bad reputation in many ways, due to the corruption and lawlessness of Riften, and some of the dangers in the surrounding hold, but environmentally it is absolutely beautiful. When the war calms down, I would not mind moving here. Oh my, a bear and a wolf attacking me at the same time. The wildlife of Skyrim, it's like they're possessed or something. I mean, who's ever heard of a wolf and a bear joining forces to attack a poor Argonian traveler? We can pass through Fort Greenwall here, which, as last I recall, has actually been taken over by a band of marauders, highwaymen, bandits. But as long as I don't provoke them, they might just let me move through. Alright, they're yelling at me, but that's alright. I'm just going to make my way through quickly. And would you look at that? They didn't even try to charge me a toll. With the Civil War going, as I said before, forts like that being taken over by criminal gangs is not an uncommon sight. And sometimes a band of highwaymen is actually a somewhat preferred option for who could take over a local fort. On our last journey through Skyrim together, we passed through the Reach, and up there you're less likely to run into a group of highwaymen, and much more likely to bump into a group of Forsworn that will cut out your heart and give it to a hag raven to perform some dark magic with. So, count your blessings, I suppose. If something goes wrong, it could always be worse, right? So we have more watchtowers here, showing us that we are approaching the very edge of Riften. We should see the city when we crest this next rise. And just in time too, as I was hoping to get off the road before evening really set in. Isn't that just gorgeous? The light streaming through the leaves, the water watercolor hues of orange and red and pink in the sky. Oh, and would you look at this? We have, what's going on? Oh, vampires. I will lend my sword to the battle. Try to deal with these foul beasts and protect the townsfolk. Well, as I was saying before, the undead interrupted. I was pleasantly surprised to see that we have bumped into a Khajiit caravan. As I've said before, I'm good friends with these traveling Khajiit traders, and whenever I see them, I always try to buy a few things from them. They do struggle in Skyrim. Just wanted to take a look over Lake Honric. It's quite beautiful in the evenings. It's really something special when you catch it at sundown. If we had arrived a few minutes earlier, we would have seen something truly spectacular, with the light glimmering off the water. It's quite shocking to see these vampires on the road. They're very bold to operate so close to a city. Well, we have the Khajiit returning to camp and getting back to normal even after that scuffle. But let's see what Akari has for me today. Yes, there is a great prejudice against the Khajiit in Skyrim, similar to the way that Argonians are mistreated in Windhelm. So let's see, a child's doll. I'll buy that for one of my kids back home. They'll appreciate that. Well, the Khajiits have quite a selection today. Some soul gems. I'll always happily buy some soul gems. I use a great deal of enchanted gear, and I always have to keep it recharged. And not sure. Oh, moon sugar. You know what I will do while I'm here? I've run out of skooma again. And don't worry, I know in our last trip together, I might have overindulged in the skooma and woken up under a bridge. I'm not going to be having any skooma today. I just figured I would pick up a few bottles when I get home, and oh no, it seems the vampires have killed poor Valendor here. I'll take my skooma with me, and I'm a bad influence. I've passed on my skooma habit to my wife as well, so I'll bring the 5 bottles back home when I meet up with Aola again, and we can have a lovely night of skooma drinking together. She has a very high tolerance for it, though. I can drink like 1 bottle and that's enough for me, and she has to have 3 before she feels anything at all. I think it's because she's a werewolf, which you can't tell anybody that, by the way, that's a secret. That's a secret. I'm not supposed to tell anybody that she's a werewolf. But you and I, we're friends. I know you'll keep my family's secrets to yourself. And I thank you for that. What's going on here? Something strange is in the air tonight. The citizens of Riften are running around and screaming. Well, anyway, let's see. I don't see anything going on. I was expecting to turn a corner and see more vampires or something, but just otherwise seems like a calm night. There's an arrow stuck in this log. Perhaps a relic of some battle here. Anyway, on my way to the guild, pass by the Jarl's home here, Mistvale Keep. The current Jarl is Layla Lawgiver. To my mind, she has good intentions, but unfortunately, she's incapable of meeting the moment, meeting the many disasters that afflict her city and her hold. She's easily swayed by all who speak to her, especially her steward, who whispers in her ear to diffuse her concerns about real problems in her city. It's a sealed gate there. Once was an entrance to the city, but I'm not sure why they closed it off. A shrine to Talos. Of course, with the Stormcloaks in charge here, this shrine is allowed to stay up if the Empire took over, with the elves looking down on them, always watching over their shoulder, the Aldmeri Dominion. That shrine would probably have to come down. But speaking of secrets between you and I, this is a secret entrance to the Thieves Guild. And I know you'll keep that to yourself as well. I'm spilling all sorts of secrets to you today. But that just goes to show how much I trust you, doesn't it? So, the thieves here they don't see me as a comrade, of course, being that I am not a member of their guild, but they're all friendly enough with me and let me pass through their home without any confrontation. And besides, they know my pockets are full of gold, and that I'm always happy to buy stolen goods. At least if I have a particular interest in them, so they like to stay on my good side. So, down here we can enter the Ragged Flagon, where we should find Danilia, and be able to make our purchase from her, acquire the set of the Song of Pelinal that she has acquired. Leaky rope here. And one of the reasons why could never join the Thieves Guild. They've really made their lair this disgusting wet sewer. And listen, I don't mind a humid, moist home, of course. I'm quite used to it from Black Marsh back home, but, you know, the type of wetness that I'm familiar with or comfortable around is swamps, rivers, that sort of thing. But this is an actual sewer, you know. I mean, there's human waste flowing in the water. Personally, I would never want to live in a place like this. But anyway, I will take my books from Danilia, who happily has taken my money. And of course, as we always do in our little excursions together where we hunt down a book, I am going to go read the Song of Pelinal. There's an inn nearby, the Bee and the Barb, I believe is its name. So I will go ahead and go to the Bee and the Barb and buy a room, and with a little privacy, dive into my newly acquired book. And I do have a sentimental attachment to this place. Just up here beyond the graveyard is the temple to Mara. And I believe most marriages in Skyrim are performed here in Riften in the temple. Although perhaps the priests would be willing to travel elsewhere, I don't know. For myself and Ayala, we did travel to Riften and got married in this temple, so I do have a sentimentality attached to Riften in that respect. Even if the town is a little too cutthroat for me. The Bee and Barb, the Bee and Barb. Now, for some reason, I don't know why, but the owner of... Okay, there's a thief running around. Interesting. For some reason, the owner of the Bee and Barb hates me. She'll probably be rude to me. Oh, yep, it's you again. What in blazes do you want? Alright. Well, Kirava might hate me, but she'll still take my money. I really have no idea what I did to offend her. My only guess is that during my wedding celebrations, there was a day or two that I can't really remember very well. The Blackbriar mead was flowing quite quickly, and if I'm being honest, the skooma was flowing maybe even faster. So it may be that I caused a mess in her inn. Who could say? And this thief is running around. Alright, we're going to close and lock our door. Take a seat and dive into the Song of Pelinal. So, without further ado, let's read. The Song of Pelinal. The life of Pelinal Whitestrake, assembled from various old fragmentary texts. Volume 1, On His Name. Editor's note. Volumes 1 through 6 are taken from the so-called Riemann manuscript located in the Imperial Library. It is a transcription of older fragments collected by an unknown scholar of the early Second Era. Beyond this, little is known of the original sources of these fragments, some of which appear to be from the same period, perhaps even from the same manuscript. But, as no scholarly consensus yet exists on dating these 6 fragments, no opinions will be offered here. That he took the name Pelinal was passing strange, no matter his later sobriquets, which were many. That was an elvish name, and Pelinal was a scourge on that race, and not much given to irony. Pelinal was much too grim for that. Even in youth he wore white hair, and trouble followed him. Perhaps his enemies named Pelinal of their own in their tongue, but that is doubtful, for it means glorious knight, and he was neither to them. Certainly, many others added to that name during his days in Tamriel. He was Pelinal the White Strake, because of his left hand made of a killing light. He was Pelinal the Bloody, for he drank it in victory. He was Pelinal Insurgent, because he gave the Crusades a face. He was Pelinal in Triumph, as the words eventually became synonymous, and men-at-arms gave thanks to the Eight when they saw his banner coming through war. He was Pelinal the Blamer, for he was quick to admonish those allies of his that favored tactics that ran counter to his, that is, sword theory. And he was Pelinal the Third, though whether this was because some said he was a god geyser who had incarnated twice before already, or that, simpler, he was the third vision given to Perif, anon Alicia, in her prayers of liberation, before he walked among the quarters of rebellion, is unknown. Volume 2, On His Coming. And then Perif spoke to the handmaiden again, eyes to the heavens which had not known kindness since the beginning of elven rule, and she spoke as a mortal, whose kindle is beloved by the gods for its strength in weakness, a humility that can burn with metaphor, and yet break easily and always, always doomed to end in death. And this is why those who let their souls burn anyway are beloved of the dragon and his kin. And she said, "And this thing I have thought of, I have named it, and I call it freedom, which I think is just another word for Shezar who goes missing. You made the first rain at his sundering, and that is what I ask now for our alien masters, that we might sunder them fully and repay their cruelty by dispersing them to drown in the Topol. Borehouse, your son, mighty and snorting, gore-horned, winged, when next he flies down, let him bring us anger." And then Kine granted Perif another symbol, a diamond soaked red with the blood of the elves, whose facets could unsector and form into a man whose every angle would cut her jailers, and a name, Pelin-El, which is the star-made knight, and he was arrayed in armor from the future time, and he walked into the jungles of Cyrod already killing, horse stamping at his side, froth-bloody and bellowing from excitement because the Pelinal was come. And Pelinal came to Perif's camp of rebels, holding a sword and mace, both encrusted with the smashed viscera of elven faces, feathers, and magic beads, which were the markings of the Eilidun, stuck to the redness that hung from his weapons. And he lifted them, saying, "These were their eastern chieftains, no longer full of their talking." Volume 3, On His Enemy. Pelinal Whitestrake was the enemy of all elf-kind that lived in Cyrod in those days. Mainly, though, he took it upon himself to slay the sorcerer kings of the Aelids in pre-arranged open combats rather than at war. The fields of rebellion he left to the growing armies of the Paravania and his bull nephew. Pelinal called out Haramir of Copper and Tea into a duel at the Tor, and ate his neck veins while screaming praise to Raymond, a name that no one knew yet. Gordaur the Shaper's head was smashed upon the goat-faced altar of Nineveh, and in his wisdom Pelinal said a small plague spell to keep that evil from reforming by welkind magic. Later that season, Pelinal slew Hadhul on the granite steps of Seatar, the Fire King's spears knowing their first refute. For a time, no weapon of the Aelids could pierce his armor, which Pelinal admitted was unlike any crafted by men, but would say no more even when pressed. When Huna, whom Pelinal raised from grain slave to hoplite and loved well, took death from an arrowhead made from the beak of Selethalel the singer, the Whitestrake went on his first madness. He wrought destruction from Narlame all the way to Celadiel, and erased those lands from the maps of elves and men, and all things in them, and Perif was forced to make sacrifice to the gods to keep them from leaving the world in their disgust. And then came the storming of White Gold, where the Aelids had made a pact with the Aurorans of Meridia, and summoned them, and appointed the terrible and golden-hued half-elf, Umaril the Unfeathered, as their champion, and for the first time since his coming, it was Pelinal who was called out to battle by another, for Umaril had the blood of the Ada, and would never know death. Volume 4, On His Deeds. Pelinal drove the sorcerer armies past the Niben, claiming all the eastern lands for the rebellion of the Paravania, and Kine had to send her rain to wash the blood from the villages and forts that no longer flew Aelid banners, for the armies of men needed to make camps of them as they went forward. And he broke the doors open for the prisoners of the Vatak, with the slave queen flying on Morehouse above them, and men called her Alesh for the first time. He entered the gate to win back the hands of the 1,000 strong of Sidor, a tribe now unknown but famous in those days, which the Aelids had stolen in the night. 2,000 hands that he brought back in a wagon made of demon bone, whose wheels trailed the sound of women when ill at heart. Text lost. And after the first pogrom, which consolidated the northern holdings for the men of Crete, he stood with white hair gone brown with elf blood at the bridge of Helden, where Perif's falconers had sent for the Nords, and they, looking at him, said that shore had returned, but he spat at their feet for profaning that name. He led them anyway into the heart of the hinterland west, to drive the Aelids inward towards the tower of white gold, a slow retreating circle that could not understand the power of man's sudden liberty and what fury idea that brought. His mace crushed the thundering axe that Umaril sent his harriers on the rebellion's long march back south and east, and carried Morahouse breath of kine to Zawathis the clever cutting man, a need with a Keptu name for healing when the bull had fallen to a volley of bird beaks, and of course at the Council of Skiffs, where all of the Paravania's armies and all of the Nords shook with fear at the storming of white gold, so much so that the Alesh herself counseled delay. Pelinal grew furious, and made names of Umaril, and made names of what cowards he thought he saw around him, and then made for the tower by himself, for Pelinal often acted without thought. Volume 5, on his love of Morahouse. It is a solid truth that Morahouse was the son of Kine, but whether or not Pelinal was indeed the Shezarene is best left unsaid. For once, Plotinu, who favored the short sword, said it, and that night he was smothered by moths. It is famous, though, that the two talked of each other as family, with Morahouse as the lesser, and that Pelinal loved him and called him nephew, but these could be merely the fancies of immortals. Never did Pelinal counsel Morahouse in time of war, for the man-bull fought magnificently, and led men well, and never resorted to madness. But the white drake did warn against the growing love with Perif. We are Otta more, and change things through love. We must take care lest we beget more monsters on this earth. If you do not desist, she will take to you, and you will transform all Cyrod if you do this. And to this, the bull became shy, for he was a bull, and he felt his form too ugly for the Paravania at all times, especially when she disrobed for him. He snorted, though, and shook his nose hoop into the light of the Secunda moon, and said, "She is like this shine on my nose hoop here, an accident sometimes, but whenever I move my head at night, she is there, and so you know what you ask is impossible." Volume 6, on his madness. And it is said that he emerged into the world like a Patamaic, that is, born by Sithis and all the forces of change therein. Still others, like Fift of Noondeed, say that beneath the Pelinal star armor was a chest that gaped open to show no heart. Only a red rage, shaped diamond fashion, singing like a mindless dragon, and that this was proof that he was a myth echo, and that where he trod were shapes of the first urging. Pelinal cared for none of this, and killed any who would speak god logic, except for fair Perif, who he said enacts rather than talks, as language without exertion is dead witness. When those soldiers who heard him say this stared blankly, he laughed and swung his sword, running into the rain of kine to slaughter their Iliad captives, screaming, "O Akka, for our shared madness I do this. I watch you watching me watching back. Umaril dares call us out, for that is how we made him." And it was during these fits of anger and nonsense that Pelinal would fall into the madness, where whole swaths of lands were devoured in divine rampage to become void, and Alessia would have to pray to the gods for their succor, and they would reach down as one mind, and soothed the white drake until he no longer had the will to kill the earth in whole. And Gerid of the Men of Gi once saw such a madness from afar, and maneuvered, after it had abated, to drink together with Pelinal, and he asked what such an affliction felt like, to which Pelinal could only answer, like when the dream no longer needs its dreamer. Volume 7, on his battle with Umaril and his dismemberment. Editor's note. This fragment comes from a manuscript recovered from the ruins of the Alessian Order's monastery at Lake Canalis, which dates it sometimes prior to the War of Righteousness, First Era 2321. However, textual analysis suggests that this fragment actually preserves a very early form of the song, perhaps from the mid-6th century. And so, after many battles with Umaril's allies, where dead Aurorans lay like candlelight around the throne, the Pelinal became surrounded by the last Ayleid sorcerer kings and their demons, each one heavy with varliance. The white drake cracked the floor with his mace, and they withdrew, and he said, "Bring me Umaril that called me out." And while mighty in his aspect and wicked, deathless golden Umaril favored ruin from afar over close combat, and so he tarried in the shadows of the White Tower before coming forth. More soldiers were sent against Pelinal to die, and yet they managed to pierce his armor with axes and arrows, for Umaril had wrought each one by long varliance, which he had been hoarding since his first issue of Challenge. Presently, the half-elf showed himself bathed in meridian light, and he listed his bloodline in the Eilidune, and spoke of his father, a god of the previous Kalpa's world river. And taking great delight in the heavy breathing of Pelinal, who had finally bled, text lost, and Umaril was laid low, the angel face of his helm dented into an ugliness which made Pelinal laugh, and his unfeathered wings broken off with sword strokes delivered while Pelinal stood frothing, above him insulting his ancestry and anyone else that took ship from old Elnafay, which angered the other elvish kings and drove them to a madness of their own, and they fell on him, speaking to their weapons, cutting the Pelinal into eighths while he roared in confusion, which even the council of skiffs could hear. Text lost. Ran when Mor shook the whole of the tower with mighty bashing from his horns the next morning, and some were slain in overabundance in the taking, and men looked for more Ayleids to kill, but Pelinal had left none save those kings and demons that had already begun to flee. It was Morahouse who found the white drake's head, which the kings had left to prove their deeds, and they spoke, and Pelinal said things of regrets, but the rebellion had turned away. And more words were said between these immortals that even the Paravant would not deign to hear. Volume 8, on his revelation at the death of Alesh. Editor's note. This is the oldest and most fragmentary of all the extant Pelinal texts. It is, however, likely closest to the original spoken or sung form of the song, and therefore has great value despite its brevity. Strangely, it appears that Pelinal is present at Alessia's deathbed, although he was killed by Umaril earlier in the saga, years before Alessia's death. Some scholars believe that this fragment is not actually a part of the Song of Pelinal, but most accept its authenticity, although there is still much debate as to its significance. And left you to gather sinew with my other half, I will bring light thereby to that mortal idea that brings the gods great joy, that is, freedom, which even the heavens do not truly know, which is why our Father, the text lost, in those first days spirits swirls before convention, that which we echoed in our earthly madness. Let us now take you up. We will show our true faces, which eat one another in amnesia, each age. Well, thank you, my friends, for joining me today on my journey across Skyrim. I am going to get some rest after a long day of walking, and I will see